So today's guest is Joseph. I just know I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, Joseph. I'm so sorry. Do you
Go
want
for
to?
it.
Okay, Rosinski.
You got it.
How was
Perfect.
that? All right. Today's guest is Joseph Rosinski, and Joseph is a technologist at Thomson Reuters, and an early adopter of all things computer related. His work focuses on the future of technology, and he speaks globally about legal technology, cybersecurity, blockchain, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, and robotics. He also has a keen interest in the future of technology as it impacts the crossroads of our personal and professional lives. Joseph, thank you very much for being with us today. Where are you calling in from?
It's great to be here. So I'm always all over the place. Normally I'm in DC. Right now I'm in Southern California, Los Angeles.
Fantastic. So, to those of you on today's call, please do share in the chat where you are calling in from. After about 12 weeks in Amsterdam, I'm calling in from Berlin today. So, I've actually moved 6 hour train journey to another European city. Okay, so we have Israel, Croatia, popular place at the moment. I hope Spencer and Barbara are hanging out. We've got New York, we've got Brazil, we've got Portugal. International group as always. Okay, so I would love to start, Joseph, with a little bit about your role at Thomson Reuters. I'm going to trip over that every time as well. What exactly does your job as a technologist and a futurist there involve? Like, what do your days look like, and what kind of activities are you doing?
That's a great question. So it's kind of been it's kind of evolved over the years. So I am at the heart of hearts a technologist, which means that from when I was a little kid all the way till now, which I like to think it was just a few years ago, but it feels like it's a lot longer than that. It's to tinker with technology, to understand the core aspects of how things work. So my role at the organization has always been to first and foremost to understand where we're going with technology, how it relates to the industry. And so I specifically work within the legal industry. I'm not a lawyer myself, but went to undergrad, specialized in economics and sociology, then went to grad school for an MBA and e-commerce degree. So what that relates to today is I try to go into different areas outside of the legal industry, so into fintech, so the financial world, into the medical world, into the startup world, and pull out different ideas and bring that back into the fold to help attorneys, to lawmakers, corporations, all those groups understand where we're going with technology and how to best leverage them.
Fantastic. So it certainly sounds like a big part of your role is to be very knowledgeable about the kind of trends in technology that are taking off, what their real world applications could be. I wonder, could you share with us some insights about how the pandemic has accelerated adoption and interest in different technologies? Like, what do you have your eye on at the moment?
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, sometimes I think we talk about it too much, but it's a good thing because it's really pushed us in a direction that we didn't anticipate would happen as fast as it has. Like I go back to some of the the predictions that I made in 2015 that I've put on my website, basically saying, okay, what do I expect is going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And one of the things was digital currencies. So that was one thing that popped out. And I said, maybe by 2025, we'll have a world currency such that it's far easier to transact, to go down the road of interacting with people, transfer of money, those types of things. But we're starting to see that happen right now. So it's a little bit faster than I had anticipated. So that's one thing. The adoption of the QR code universally has been great. There was a project that I worked on probably 10 years ago that tried to get all of these different publications such that if you saw a magazine, whatever, you'd use a QR code, you'd pop it up. Back then, you needed to download the app, you needed to like load it on your device, be it an Apple or Android device, and it was a pain. But now it's part of the ecosystem, whether you have an Android or and you're like, all right, it's easy. You're going out, hopefully outside maybe, and you're going to a restaurant and you get that up. Use case that has really advanced the ball, push people towards the edge. And of course, the last thing I bring up is I've been fortunate in the last bunch of years at this organization to have been able to work remote, to travel, to meet customers all over the world. We've always been thinking about that, but now it's It's far easier for people to do that. It's accepted. That's the biggest thing. People accept um, much more easily the idea that I'm working wherever, just like you just described, everyone all over the world, and not worry about that as much. In the past, people worried about that. There are some weird things we can go down the road of, but we'll hold off on that perhaps when people are trying to analyze those things.
Fantastic. So I'd love to actually pick up on your remote work point there. So what are your thoughts on digital nomads, and do you sort of see remote work prompting more people to experiment with global mobility in the years ahead? I know you've just mentioned that people are wanting to kind of work from anywhere and kind of work differently, but specifically in terms of that mobility, that kind of moving around countries, are you looking at anything in that space?
Yeah, so there's a few things going on. If you have ever worked at a traditional organization, be it a nonprofit, be it a government agency, even an organization like myself, which dates back to 1880, I believe, the traditional mindset of people were no way, no how. There's no way you can actually be productive working remotely. It just doesn't work. Then everyone was forced globally, forced to clearly do this, and it's changed that dynamic a lot. The first 3 months, if it lasted 3 months, 6 months, I think people would have been like, all right, we're going to go back in the office. Things will go back to normal. Now that we're a year and a half into it, and we're probably going to be 2 years by the time things really start to open up, maybe longer. I mean, this could honestly go for another year and a half, at least 2 years, maybe even longer than that. It's forced everyone to recalibrate what makes sense and how they're going to work. So I know for me, like people have decided to move to different parts of the United States and work in beautiful areas that they wouldn't have been able to do before. The connectivity, the internet connectivity is there. Might be in remote parts of Maine, up in New England, or different parts of the Midwest or Mountain West in the US, or even broader. So the islands, all of those things. And the appeal for some of these islands to say, hey, we're going to give you 10 grand to move here. Because you can provide that tax base for us, that sort of thing. All of that is clearly in the works right now. And what the biggest part about this that I think is transformative is the acceptance of traditional business models that before would have said no, absolutely not. And now they're like, yes, we get it. It works.
I guess some of these shifts are also really moving the kind of decision making power from businesses more over to individuals. What do you think kind of the human side of some of these technological changes might be? Like, how do you think day-to-day life for most people might be changing in relation to remote work, but also the other trends that you were talking about?
So like the human side in terms of just their existence as a human being outside of work, or the combination therein.
I think definitely the combination. There are a lot of people
Okay.
in our community who are great believers in sort of work-life integration rather than work-life balance. So I think they're very interlinked. I certainly believe that.
Oh, no question. I think that's imperative. The team that I have always tried to push that, even though it wasn't something that was necessarily an intrinsic part of the business model. But now that people have the flexibility of working remotely, and this is for better for worse. And so I tend to be stark in some respects, and I don't try to be too fluffy around stuff. But um, what we have found is that yes, one of the great things about people being able to work wherever they are is that flexibility. Okay, maybe they're taking a few hours in the midday to do X, Y, and Z, to go surfing, to go do whatever they need to take care of for their family, for their kids, relative, loved one who may be sick. The allowance for that is far greater than it's ever been before in this world, which is fantastic to see. But on the other side, the side that I have found myself caught up in is as I've gone remote, and normally I would have just traveled to meet with people and do talks and wherever. And there would have been a lot more travel time built into that and all this other stuff. And I found myself now working probably more than I've ever worked in my life. Sometimes I'm working 12 hours because it's a little more difficult, but there might be a day that I have a few more hours to play with, which is fantastic. So that's on me. I need to be able to sort of to look at the scope of what I'm doing and sort of cut out what I need to versus what I'm doing. Um, so yeah, I think it's fantastic that we can do this at this stage.
Okay, fantastic. And maybe just to zoom back into nomads a little bit and some of the implications. if people are moving around the world, or if more people, if a large number of people are beginning to kind of move around the world and kind of play with this work from anywhere idea, do you have any thoughts on sort of what the kind of tax implications and the legal implications of that might be? Because I've been reading a little bit. I think there was a Financial Times story today or yesterday about some countries sort of becoming a bit fearful that they're going to lose all their best talent and actually lose their kind of tax base. So I know you mentioned before a little bit about the kind of incentive side of places investing and trying to get people to come. But what about the losers? What about the places people are moving away from? What are your thoughts on that side of things?
It's funny that you asked that because I think about this a lot. It's one of those things where if you look at the numbers right now, and I'll just focus on the US, we can certainly talk about the rest of the world too. Um, some of the primary draws have always been New York and the San Francisco, Silicon Valley area, and of course now like Austin, Texas, even DC, because it's tech centric. But now that there's been the problem with those areas is that they're very expensive. So does it make sense? And the quality of life isn't necessarily that great. If you're in New York City, which I used to go to at least 2 or 3 times a month, you live in a little tiny little box. You're paying tons in taxes. 40, maybe 50% of your income goes to taxes. Why not go down to the Caribbean, live in a country or a nation state, whatever it is, that has hopefully more tax favorable conditions. You're able to do everything that you're able to do in New York, and you're on the same time zone. That's fantastic. You have that flexibility. But yes, the worry is that is New York at risk for a tax base? Is San Francisco at risk? I actually don't think that necessarily will be the case. I think there's going to be a pull away for the next little while, but there's always going to be this sort of demand for people to live in those cities, um, just because there's a draw to it. Maybe people like the environment; they love being able to walk to restaurants easily because they're in the city proper. But I think there's going to be a pull away, slight pull away from some of that. It's going to be spread out. It's going to be a little more even. It's going to allow for these countries, these islands, to benefit from that. So they'll have an increased tax basis. Um, so it's just, I think it's going to be benefit for all. I don't think anybody's really going to lose out in the bigger scheme of things.
And do you think we'll see kind of new hub destinations popping up, whether that be in the US or internationally? So, you've just mentioned New York and San Francisco, which I'd say are kind of the big hubs of the 20th century that sort of drew a lot of people to them. Do you think that some of these incentives and these kind of moves by different places could actually create a new kind of set of hubs around the world?
Undoubtedly, yes. There's no question. I've seen it in certain parts of Europe, certain parts of Asia, where depending on your industry, what you're focused in on, there are people that are moving to certain spots because they've either made a name for themselves. I spent a lot of time in the cryptocurrency world, and there's certain parts of the world that people are like, hey, we're creating a special environment for this. And one one thing that's kind of funny, and it's a great use case, and we'll see where it goes, is El Salvador. So El Salvador is the first country in the world to now make Bitcoin legal tender. There are other countries doing the same thing. So I've already seen an influx of people in the industry move down there saying, you know what, this is going to be a haven for people that are interested in this currency to be able to have a place that is more accepting, more inviting of this, and we'll see what comes of that. So you're seeing that across the board, depending on the industry that you're working in. I've done a lot of coding back in the day, so a lot of dev work, custom designs and web world. And so there's areas of the world that are perfect for that. Design work in that, I knew cultures around that as well. So yes, there's no question there's going to be certain new hubs that develop from this.
Fantastic. So I'd love to zoom in a little on the kind of cryptocurrency and blockchain side of things. Um, what are some of the implications of these technologies that you're most excited about?
So this is, I mean, I love this area. It's just so incredible. And I think I saw, the schedule of events that you have, and someone had talked about DeFi. So decentralized finance is one incredible area. But another area that is a little bizarre to think about because there's a lot of hoopla around it right now is the NFT market, right? So the non-fungible tokens, which are really at this stage, it's digital art. So in the beginning, it's sometimes goofy little pictures of things. And I mean this with respect, like the CryptoPunks were probably the first of these NFTs, so digital art that are unique pieces of art. I think everyone's aware of this just to make sure. There were originally 10,000 created of these things. They're stored on the blockchain. People transact them. They were initially given for free. Anybody who wanted to claim them in their digital wallet could do so. Now, the minimum they cost is 120,000 US, which is insane to think about in 4 years. Upper range, they're 8-9 million US. So whatever. The arts, if you're into arts and you're into creating these things, that market is going to be transformative. And that's just the beginning. So music is going to be the same thing. Any deed to properties, anything that you can create digitally that is unique, special, you can basically register on the blockchain and make it in such a fashion that it is something of value going forward. And you could do that clearly globally. You're working on your computer. I've built tons and tons of different pieces of art over the years, either through websites or whatever the case is. That can be monetized now, and you can do that anywhere very easily. It's a fantastic industry, music, and then everything going forward. It's open to your own imagination about where you can go with that alone.
Fantastic. And I wonder if you have any recommendations for kind of learning materials or blog posts or talks or anything like that about NFTs, because I think it's a really interesting area, but it's perhaps not that accessible, even if you know quite a bit about cryptocurrency. So, yeah, I'd just be really curious if you have any recommendations on that front.
So this is a weird one because when I first started getting involved in Twitter way long ago, it was one of those things I was like, let's see what happens with this thing. And even for up until probably 3 years ago, I used it once in a while just to post something that I either written about or a podcast, whatever the case was. Now it is by far one of the best mechanisms for the latest information that's coming out. So I would say, I mean, yes, there's podcasts out there and there's different blogs that are out there, but this movement is so fast. If you were to invest in it, things happen within the hour. Someone announces something, and if it's a known project by a known name, for some reasons they don't necessarily announce this a week or two in advance. It might be something that say, "Hey, come now, and this is what's available." And so there are different Twitter accounts or organizations that I would recommend following, and I could, send me a note afterwards. I can send those to you, but it is moving that quickly that that's kind of the medium that I would tend to gravitate towards.
Live updates necessary here.
Yes.
Great. Just sticking with blockchain and crypto for a moment, I'm really interested to know your thoughts on what the implications are for the kind of legal system. So we've had Sophie Napper, who's an international arbitrator, who perhaps you'll be familiar with her work. I know she's involved with the Claros Foundation, and she
Yes.
sort of gave us a foundation, I suppose, in beginning to understand some of those implications of the kind of this kind of space of decentralized technologies. But what would you say are some of the most exciting sort of implications for how the law works? And particularly, I suppose, for our purposes, we're interested in this kind of like global layer, things happening at a level above the nation state. So, any thoughts to share on that front?
It's a great question. So when it comes to the law, right now it's still early days when we think about cryptocurrencies and smart contracts. And I think everyone knows what a smart contract is, but it's basically a little bit of code on the blockchain that executes based on X or Y, and then it sort of makes a decision on that. So as we move into this space, as countries or the ether, the world starts to think about how we look at the law, things will become codified. Um, on a blockchain, leveraging commonsensical, hopefully, nomenclatures and names and conventions that allow us to say, okay, if you want to create a global legal system or something that triggers something to in action, you're going to start to see this open up a bit more because it makes sense. It's the direction of where we're going to see this. In various countries, it's going to be bogged down in like, how are we going to handle this? How are we going to do this? We know they want to hold tight to that mindset, which makes sense from their perspective because they're being protective about it. But going forward, you could conceive of a set of rules or regulations that are sort of commonsensical that people get together on, a common ethos or ethics, regulations that say, okay, we're all going to agree to this, X, Y, and Z. And how will that be executed? Well, once we agree upon this, we can have common sets of language around that, and then common sets of almost paragraphs that sit into a contract. So if you have a contract you're agreeing to with somebody from Dubai and you're in Sweden, and you're like, okay, what do I need to do to execute this? Well, you both agree into that, and it's hopefully stored on the blockchain. So you have that intermediary, that's code, and you're both agreeing to it. You're executing on that, and then the transaction, the funds, may sit in an escrow that sits in a smart contract that's on the blockchain that you've agreed to. And then if this happens, then it's executed and it's done, and the money transfers. If it doesn't, then whatever. And you've heard the arbitration component of it already if you talked with people from Claros. So you get that if there's an issue. This is the future. It's just a matter of getting people on board and thinking about it. It's going to take some time to to move in that direction. I've already seen a lot of pushback, but there's a huge amount of promise, especially for people that are thinking about this in advance.
I think that segues very nicely into my next question, actually. So, a theme we come back to a lot in these sessions is this idea of the nation state losing relevance. And a big part of that is due to the very kind of slow transformation of traditional governments. The way I think about it is if you consider citizens as users of a country, that user experience is really, really poor compared to online shopping, dating, ordering food, calling taxis, etc. Across most of the world, government services have really kind of been left behind if you compare them to the other aspects of daily life. Would you kind of agree with that assessment? And what do you think about the future prospects of nation states and national governments?
So this is fantastic to think about. And just for transparency for everyone, this is all like these are fresh questions. So I haven't really thought about any of them out loud. I mean, I've thought about them to myself. So this is kind of I really enjoy this. So thank you for the excellent questions. But this is the first time they've been verbalized to me, so I'm really kind of thinking about it off the top of my head. So again, I love this concept, the idea of the nation state losing relevance. There's two worlds. So I live in this world that, yes, that's crazy to think about, but I also understand it. So I totally understand. I've gone down that rabbit hole and I see where we're potentially going. But I also I'm still rooted in, I was born in Washington, D.C. I've seen the lawmakers. My parents, friends are all lobbyists. I know how that works. And I know in the US how things are, as well as Europe and Asia and different parts where I've traveled. I get the pull that that's a very difficult thing for the 95% of the world, maybe even higher, to grapple with and try to understand that the nation state is losing relevance. But it's happening. It's starting to happen. And people are starting to get the idea that, do we need this? How do we work in this new world going forward? And what needs to take place? And how does that work? And you're starting to see that take place, of course, with the decentralization that we're already talked about, you've already heard about. But it is something it is extremely difficult for the vast majority of people to wrap their heads around yet. So it's going to take some time to think about. Hopefully, that's the beginning stages of what we're talking about. Does that make some sense?
It does indeed. I guess maybe to borrow your language when you were talking about the legal system a moment ago, I suppose maybe a follow-up question is if we can kind of see law becoming codified, do you think there's the possibility of political infrastructure becoming codified in the same way? And I'm asking that on quite a technical level based on your expertise, if that makes sense. So if we think about smart contracts for the legal side of things, do you think that there are also applications where we could kind of apply that to politics? I guess is my question.
Yes, I definitely think so in time, but I think it's a ways out. So I think again, you all know what a DAO is, distributed autonomous organization, of course, and that's the premise that code becomes something that is distinguishable, and you can bake in common language into something, and then it becomes executable over time using the smart contracts, such that you can get to the point where a little bit of AI, the smart contracts work together to then start making some decisions based on things, and you can move in the direction years out to politicians being sort of an AI DAO imbued type system. So that is feasible, but it is a little further out. I mean, you could actually do it now. Honestly, you could build these things out now if you want to. It's just a matter of getting enough people to buy into it, into the concept and the idea. And if you have enough progressive ideas, which we're moving to, again, it's almost like this collective mindset shift across the globe. But when you talk to certain groups, and I'm still tethered to that because I hear about it every day in the traditional legal markets, that would blow their minds, absolutely blow their mind to think about that. And then you go into the metaverse, right? So you start thinking about the metaverse, which is coming. And then as us living in this potential world are connected to this world of virtual land and all that stuff, blah, 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 which I think is very powerful and is coming. A little creepy sometimes, but also very fascinating in others.
Yeah, I guess just hearing your answer there made me think about how, with remote work was possible for many years, but it really took a kind of cultural change that ended up being prompted by the pandemic for that to go mainstream. And I guess if you apply the same kind of idea to what you're talking about, it's that technically there are ways in which we could kind of use code to transform politics, but actually it's going to take that kind of cultural change, which without a shock tends to happen slower. I think that's kind of what you were getting at a little bit, right?
Absolutely right. Yes.
Cool. So I've just got one more question for you, and then we're going to do some breakout rooms, and some of the audience will be coming up with some extra questions based
Okay.
on our discussion so far. My final question for now. So the Plumia project, as I explained at the beginning, aims to build a country on the internet, and we are still figuring out exactly what that looks like and how it might work. And these conversations are really a part of that process to help us think everything through and sort of see the opportunities. Essentially, though, we see an internet country as an entity providing the services of a traditional nation state government, but existing at the global layer and powered by decentralized technologies. My question to you is, what are your thoughts on this idea of an internet country?
So when Casey first wrote me, I dare say 6 months ago about, hey, can you come talk with us? I did just initial research about what you all are working on, and I was fascinated by it. The one thing that I always come back to is um, how, and I think it's possible, as you sort of just described it again, it came to me. If I'm living in Y, so if I'm living in, oh, I don't know, let's say South Africa, um, and I'm literally living there, but I'm a part of this global country, so to speak. Um, the one caveat that I think back to is, okay, is the tax piece, because that's fundamentally, when we're looking at all of this, that's really what governments care about. They want to tax you. Of course, they need the money to pay for things. So if you're able to figure out that portion where if they're getting the revenue they need because you're living there, so you're using maybe the schools, you're using the infrastructure, blah blah blah. If you're able to figure out that part, um, and it doesn't feel like they're losing something from that, then I think it could logically make sense. But if you're also paying taxes to them, then what's the benefit of being the global person? You know what I'm saying? Citizen. So I'm like going back and forth about that.
Absolutely. And maybe just a final comment from me. One of the ways that I've been thinking about this challenge is the kind of distinction between residency and citizenship that exists in the world today. And I think that you're totally right. There's kind of some unbundling to do, I think, with regard to what exists at the moment to actually figure out what makes sense at that global layer, and then how do you kind of I guess, kind of bolster what's actually happening on the ground, make it very easy for people to engage and for people to pay taxes and things actually on the ground where they are, which is perhaps a bit more residency. But yeah, I think it's all for the taking, and we're going to do our best to try and do some of that unbundling and come up with the solutions.
It's gonna be wild to watch.
Oh, well, thank you so, so much, Joseph. I'm now going to hand the mic over to Casey, who's going to organize us into some Zoom breakouts. And we will see you in a few for a few more questions.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Cool. So right now I'm going to create some breakout rooms. You should have maybe 3 or 4 people in your room. I guess we're going to have one main breakout. And again, for those of you who are here with us for the first time, what we try to do in this session is to take a little bit of time to maybe take a minute on your own to come up with a question for Joseph, and then maybe spend 4 or 5 minutes as a group together, not trying to come up with one question to ask Joseph, but to kind of yes and each other and really help each other come up with like the most interesting question of what you've got. And then hopefully we come back and there's 3 or 4 questions we can ask. All right, everybody, welcome back. We're back in the main room. We've got a little bit of time left. I think today we'll just go with whoever's the question. So would any of y'all who are in the breakout, would you like to, do you have any questions for Joseph? I see Domenico, do you want to start?
Hi there, it's Dom. We're talking about just following your thought process on the tax situation and if you can fix the tax situation. And one of the questions that came up was, is there maybe just the way we look at it, coming from predominantly Western countries and looking at it from a Western point of view, is there not maybe potentially a lot of other countries that don't care necessarily about taxing nomads, but would love to attract them somehow?
So is the question beyond just the taxes, or is it, you're talking about just tracking people in general, that there are countries that just want to track people?
Attract people, yes. So
Oh, attract. Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, I think there definitely are countries that are trying to bring people in. I've always thought of it as primarily revenue generating things. So like, be it tax or not, if you have someone there, what's the impact of that individual being there? So of course they're buying something, they're feeding into the economy in and of itself by buying things, renting places, buying cars, renting a car, not using a car at all, using services there. So by attracting people, it's clearly to their benefit. Until you get to a certain point, then it's probably more of a difficult thing for them to deal with. But yeah, so I think countries are clearly trying to do that now. You've always seen them do that. There's incentives right now for people to become citizens, to sort of buy your citizenship. More and more, the crypto market, the people that have done very well are able to buy citizenship in various countries or islands or whatever the case might be, and then they don't have to pay taxes to them, but maybe there's a flat tax that they're paying, but they're also getting the benefits of use for that. So hopefully, does that make any sense, what I'm saying? Did I answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yes, kind of. I was kind of interested in your perspective from a political perspective. Now, are we going to see like USA going to political war with Colombia, who says we don't care about having nomads living here and not paying taxes? That kind of environment.
Yes. Okay. I see what you're saying. I think if the draw away from a country becomes dramatic, then yes, you'll see probably games at play, that they'll do various tariffs, or they'll try to prevent citizens from whatever country from leaving, to almost force their hand in not doing so. I think if it becomes that dramatic, yes, you will see some of that. I just don't know how big the draw is going to be to pull that it's going to be that dramatic. I think there's going to be, clearly the trend is towards this distribution of people to countries that they want to live in because they feel better about it, the weather, whatever the case is. And some countries are going to lose out. The one thing that we have not talked about is the politics in general and the philosophy behind countries. I'll be very quick about this. Over the next bunch of years is going to transform the way we think about things. So think about China, and I'm not political. I'm trying to be apolitical here, but China has a completely different mindset about what their citizens can do or shouldn't do. I mean, the social credit score, everything that people do can now be graded and allowing them to do things or not to do things. They can't get a loan because they've been seen by a camera jaywalking across the street several times. their social credit score gets knocked down. So those countries could have some significant problems going forward, but they have a ton of influence over the rest of the world. Much more influence going forward in 2025 when China probably becomes the superpower, the biggest superpower in the world, and then the Belt and Road. So the influence that they have throughout Latin America and Africa is going to be much bigger because they're giving them those countries, countries in those areas, a lot of money and infrastructure. So there's a lot of things at play here. Sorry, little tangent. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. No, it was very insightful.
Do we have any questions from others in the group? I maybe have a follow-up question to that, which kind of just talking about. I know you're part futurist. I know you focus a lot on kind of future of legal tech, but I'm curious, as you see the kind of geopolitical stage changing, how do you think that affects this whole movement of kind of like people like right now? One of us, if there wasn't COVID, could go to Japan, could go to Taiwan, could even, I know people who've spent, 9-month stints in Shenzhen, China. How do you think this kind of plays out in the coming years?
So there's a few parts that I think. One is, yes, when things hopefully open back up, and we'll see when that happens. There's probably going to be some more variants that come down the road that could be worse than this Delta variant. We have Lambda, but Lambda's not apparently as bad. But that's going to create some more restrictions, ebb and flow of the restrictions going forward. But the one thing that I keep thinking back to is the divide that's probably going to happen over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. And that is what I mentioned in terms of nation states that are going to be more restrictive, that have decided that they want to go down the road of a bit more of I hate to say this analogy, but the iron fist analogy that maybe China has decided, that they want to monitor everyone. They're the first to the market for the central bank digital currency. And I think it's still semi-pilot program, but I guess it's working. But they allows them to see every single transaction, if they want, that someone does in China, in the various provinces right now. They can do that. Every government around the world will have to make a decision as they move to that world. So we're going to see the internet also is going to splinter. We're already starting to see it with firewalls that are up in maybe Iran or China or North Korea, and there's other countries that are Turkey does it every once in a while. When you see that starting to take place, you're seeing what we now have always seen as a universal internet that's generally available to everyone that has a connection. That's going to fracture. And depending on where you are, you're either going to be on one side of it or the other. And you're going to have to make a decision about, all right, I love Turkey. I love Istanbul. I love traveling throughout Turkey. It's a beautiful country. But the ebbs and flows of the political regimes that are in place, depending on which side you sit, can be very positive or could be actually quite negative. So that is also a part of all of this. Where do you live? What could potentially happen within that country? I mean, I was going to move to to Haiti at one point to volunteer. What would have it been like there? And there's always turmoil there. There are things that are constantly happening, overthrows of government. Think about how stable your government is wherever you are and how that could impact your connectivity to what you're doing in your daily job. Sorry, hopefully that makes sense.
Super interesting. Any questions from the audience to follow up? Otherwise, I always have more. So Joe, this is maybe a little bit of a tangent as well. And I know I'm curious how much you've looked into like DAOs. I don't know if that's kind of much of the focus of your work, but one idea that's surfaced a couple of times in the community is how either the community itself that we're building or aspects of the community could be kind of implemented in a DAO-like structure. And I'm curious if your thoughts about that, where you see work well, or where you think the whole kind of DAO space is going, especially from what I understand, some of the more popular DAOs, even though it is decentralized, there's like one or two or several people who are kind of like very well known in the community who end up making a lot of decisions, or kind of they've got maybe like a lot of sway. So anyways, I'm curious to hear any thoughts you might have on that.
Yeah, I think that you all could totally go down this road if you haven't already. I am sure that you've started to play around with it a little bit. it makes sense given what sort of been outlined today and what I've read about recently. I think one of the things that is always a bit of a worry, and there's mechanisms that you can build into it that people have around this, is some of the traditional DAOs that I've seen, basically it's sort of a tokenized DAO, right? So you have a token that represents, it's usually not a one-to-one, but we always think in the traditional, going back to what's the previous question person asked about questions. We're used to, in the Western world, having a single vote per person. With DAOs, sometimes you can get additional votes and potentially can have more of a sway with that. And I think that is a concern that has to be addressed in this world, because what if you were able to get a ton of votes and then you're ultimately the person that's has most control and most sway over the group? And that's the part that I think people really have to start to think about. And as it's developed, concentrate on what makes the most sense, because people can also pass their votes off to other people. And we kind of have that in the US. If you think about it, people call it a democracy. It's really a republic. You're giving your votes to somebody who's making a decision for you. I mean, there are people, it's not a direct one-to-one. You're offering up, hey, I want this person to vote on my behalf. We don't think about it that way typically, day in, day out, but that's really what it is. So if we're able to come up with that balance, then I think it could definitely work. A great question. It's funny, a lot of these things are things I think about, but I haven't verbalized. I've written a little bit about it. So it's kind of neat to be able to just to talk about it with you all. So thank you again for the opportunity to think about this stuff.